Hello, film students. Welcome to the second part of the history of film. Hopefully, you've watched The Trip to the Moon, and you watched The Great Train Robbery, George Méliès's Trip to the Moon, Edwin S. Potter's Great Train Robbery. The first two films are really kind of laid the groundwork of what movies could be. Once you're done with that reminder, you need to put your ratings for those out of 10 on Verso Learning. From there, the standard length of the films at that time was about one reel or 10 to 15 minutes. Which are not very long movies. Maybe that Quibi thing that nobody ever signed up for. They were more like that back then. Feature films, which are our standard length of films, an hour, hour and a half, sometimes two, and then you get some of these that are 3-4 hours. They started in Australia, actually. Good eye, Mike. The American pioneer is D.W. Griffith, who picked up on these feature films, and you could expand the storytelling much, much more. He is a monumental man in terms of cinema. He was the first one to really do feature films in the United States. He made the first movie in Hollywood. At that time, most movies were made outside of New York City and Brooklyn or Queens or the Bronx. He made the most popular film of the teens, which is hugely controversial, Birth of a Nation, which led to the rebirth of the KKK on Stone Mountain, Georgia. After this film came out, it was the most popular film of the decade. President Wilson loved the movie, called it "Writing History with Lightning," and it really kind of stained the contributions of D.W. Griffith to Hollywood, because he is the one that really taught everyone. I mean, Charlie Chaplin, the great cinema, the great pantomime was what he was known as, called him the teacher of us all. But we look back now and see that was an incredibly racist film. In 1911, the first animated movie came out. Winsor McCay's Little Nemo in Slumberland has nothing to do with Finding Nemo. So it's changing. The 20s, Queens was the early filmmaking. In the 1920s, filmmaking moved to Hollywood because they had room to grow and the weather was always perfect in Hollywood. In New York, it gets cold, it gets rainy, it gets foggy. At that time, they're making over 800 films a year. The era was dominated by silent film stars like Tom Mix, who actually made a couple westerns in Colorado, including one in Glenwood Canyon. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Douglas Fairbanks, and the first It girl, because she starred in a movie called It, not with the clowns and balloons and all that, was Clara Bow. She's Hollywood's first sex symbol. And so because she was in a movie called It, the new hot actress that everybody, women want to look like and men want to be with, is called the It Girl now. This is a picture from Harold Lloyd Safety Last. Pretty funny movie. I'm going to skip that here. And then in 1927, everything changed. Talkies. Sound was embedded into movies. Al Jolson, his movie The Jazz Singer, which is controversial today. That is a white man playing a black person. It's called blackface comedy. It's extremely racist and not okay. But this was the first movie with sound. It used the Vitaphone system. Like I said in the previous video, it embedded that strip of tape onto the film that would project sound. People thought it was a gimme, it was a gimmick, that it wasn't going to last. And then within a few years, all the movies are talkies. Some film stars, because they could not act, they couldn't speak properly, they had thick accents like Clara Bow, their careers were ended by talkies. By 1929, almost all the films are talkies, and some film stars and directors could not adapt and their careers were over. This ushers in the golden age of Hollywood, which lasts from the late 20s and the 30s all the way to the 50s, when Hollywood had their big stars and they really dominate entertainment in America. In 1929, you have the first Academy Awards that are given out, which are known today as the Oscars. They award the best films, the best cinematography, the best sound, all the categories about movie making. The first full-length all-color films were released in 1929. They're just really expensive. So there's films that are black and white all the way up to the 60s. Movies thrived during the Great Depression. People that were, 25% of Americans are out of work, but one thing they could do is go enjoy a double feature or go enjoy a film. Most movies back then offered realism, like kind of portrayed life as it was, like The Grapes of Wrath, which came out in 1939, 1940, or escapism. You could go live in a fantasy land for a couple hours and escape your drab, terrible life. Because of the Dust Bowl and you're unemployed, you could watch The Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind. And so some of the big movies that came out during the golden era of Hollywood, King Kong, It Happened One Night, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first full-length feature animated movie, which started the huge Disney empire. It's one of our films we're going to watch. Gone with the Wind, the most popular movie of all time in terms of tickets sold. The Wizard of Oz, the most referenced movie in history, by far. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Wuthering Heights, Stagecoach, that's John Wayne's first really big hit movie as a Western. Citizen Kane, critically acclaimed as the greatest movie of all time. Casablanca. After the World War II and you get the beginning of the Cold War, you have the House of Un-Americans Activities Committee investigating Hollywood for suspected communist activities. In fact, 19 people in Hollywood, producers, directors, writers, etc., were blackballed for refusing to take a loyalty oath to the United States. They thought that the Soviets and the communists were trying to put secret communist propaganda in the film, and it's kind of a stain on Hollywood. As TV emerged, the golden era of Hollywood was over. People could stay at home, tune in to the boob tube, as they used to call it, and enjoy entertainment from their home. And so Hollywood had to change. Before this time, all movies had to adhere to what's called the Production Code, or the Hays Code. It was enforced from 1930 to 1967. They were decency standards. They were strict guidelines for filmmakers that were followed. The Motion Pictures Producers and Directors Association, which is now the Motion Pictures Association of America, or MPAA. Some of the three general principles of all movies: no picture shall be produced that will lower the moral standards of those who see it, like Dumb and Dumber. Hence, the sympathy of the audience should never be thrown to the side of crime. It shouldn't be sympathetic to wrongdoing, evil, or sin. Correct standards of life, subject only to requirements of drama entertainment, shall be presented. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for violation. That's very vague. It went much further. Nudity and suggestive dances were prohibited. The ridicule of religion was forbidden. Ministers of religion were not to be represented as comic characters or villains. Illegal drug use was forbidden, as well as the use of liquor, except for when it was not required for the plot. Methods of crime, how to break a safe or how to start a fire, not allowed. References to alleged sexual perversion, homosexuality, venereal disease, all forbidden, as well as the depictions of childbirth. The language section bans several various words and phrases that were considered to be offensive. Murder scenes had to be filmed in a way that discouraged imitations in life. Brutal killings could not be shown in detail. Revenge in modern times was not justified. The sanctity of marriage in the home was to be upheld. Pictures shall not imply that low forms of sex, relationship, and other are accepted or common thing. Adultery, illicit sex, although recognized sometimes as a plot device, could not be explicitly or justified as an attractive option. Portrayals of miscegenation were forbidden. I don't even remember what that means. Scenes of passion were not to be introduced when it was not essential to the plot. Excessive and less level kissing was to be avoided. You didn't want to stimulate the lower and baser element of the country. The flag of the United States was to be treated respectfully, and the people in the history of this nation was to be presented, quote, fairly. Vulgarity was not allowed. Capital punishment not allowed. So with TV competing with movies, they had to change it. And so because of this, they came out with the rating system. In the 50s, you have the decline of popularity in films, and so it led to more color films, wide-angle shots, epic movies, 3D, more sex appeal, more stretching the boundaries of that production code. You have the Ten Commandments, you have Ben-Hur, you have Spartacus. These are epic films. The two iconic stars are James Dean and Marilyn Monroe from the 50s. In the 60s, films were being more made on location to make them stand apart from the studio shows of television. They were still family-oriented early in the decade, but innovators led to a rekindling of film. You have Dr. Strangelove, The Graduate, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider. It led to a new Hollywood. And in 1968, you get the introduction of the MPAA rating system, which we know today. It ended the reign of the production code. You could show things that you weren't supposed to. Nudity was allowed. Cursing was allowed, as long as it had the rating. In fact, Midnight Cowboy, 1968, was the only film in history to win the Best Picture that was rated X. Originally, there was no rated R. It was rated X. And so a really lewd adult film was XXX. They've changed the production code. Now we have G, PG, R, and NC-17. PG-13 was out in the 80s. And so that's what's kind of going on. You have these new filmmakers who emerged in the 70s. Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Brian De Palma changed Hollywood forever. The monumental, very popular with critics and fans, The Godfather, You have The Exorcist, and then Jaws is really the first blockbuster movie, followed by Star Wars. And this changes Hollywood to where they want these big hits and they want franchises and merchandising and all that kind of stuff. And so the idea of sequels and everything starts to really change Hollywood. And so that's kind of how it is today. Blockbusters continue to be made. There's remakes, there's reboots, there's sequels that are all the rage. Disney's remaking every animated movie into a live action movie. The industry adapted when home viewing came to be with VCRs, DVDs, and even today with streaming. Now Disney, for instance, the live action Mulan is being released to people directly. They have to pay, even if they're a Disney Plus subscriber, $30. Today there's also the battle of digital effects using CGI versus practical effects. And so it's just kind of, Hollywood is really changing, especially with movie theaters barely opening up in this country. More people are watching independent films, and Netflix is a giant. Netflix is changing Hollywood and Prime and all that. That's all I have for today. I hope you have a little bit of a brief history of the history of film. Throughout the course, we're going to, by watching the films, we'll be learning a little bit more about it. I hope you enjoyed this.